will, open your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is where we begin this morning. We had begun talking last week about the topic of building our own faith. And we had mentioned last week that it really just boils down to the idea of looking at the evidences and being personally convicted and drawing a logical conclusion from the things that we look at. And we want to look at the same topic this morning, but kind of delve into it in a slightly different fashion. We want to talk about the struggles that can be there as we begin the process of building our own faith. Here in Hebrews chapter 11, we looked there last week in verse 6. Without faith it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. Our own faith is paramount to pleasing God. There is no way that we can please him without it. And unless you believe that he exists and he rewards those who diligently seek him, you cannot please God. There is no halfway measure on this. So getting it right and understanding it properly is really key and really important. There's a couple challenges when it comes to building our own faith, and one of them is independent thinking. As we mature, we go from taking our parents' thoughts and making them our own. And there's really nothing wrong with us having our parents' thoughts. As we grow up, that's the framework in which we kind of build the world around us, is understanding things through their eyes. And as we grow up, we take those things that they have given us as their thoughts. We take the evidence of the world around us, we compare those things, see if they actually lines up. And sometimes we say, yes, that does line up. And those become our own thoughts as we compare the evidence and we are personally convicted on those ideas. And sometimes we disagree. And in that process of becoming independent thinkers, there are some pitfalls, some things that we have to wrestle with. And number one is the idea of rejecting everything outright. As we grow up, in our push and independence, sometimes we reject everything that our parents insist on or find in order to find something of our own. And this is a painful way to transition into adulthood. And I say that because our parents are given to us as guides. And as such, they really do care for us and really do want the very best for us. All the things that we kind of go through are the same things that our parents go through. Now, for those who are really young, I realize it doesn't seem logical because they're ancient. Parents are unbelievably old, and the world that they lived in, black and white and stereo sound, they certainly can't go the things that we went through. And that's not the case. The things that we as parents teach our children, the things that maybe we struggled with, the things that we had a hard time with, the things that we regret from your age are the things we are trying to instill in you now so that you don't grow up to be our age and have all the same regrets that we have. So the idea of becoming our own independent thinkers, sometimes we simply reject everything that our parents say is right or wrong or good or bad in order to find things that are our own. Now that is a way to become an independent thinker. It's also a way to have a whole lot of heartaches. And there's no need to automatically reject everything your parents give you. What you do is you take the things that they've given you, compare them to the world around you, compare them to the scriptures, the ideas that God has put forward, and find out if they are factual. And you can adopt them as your own without ever having to reject them in the first place. That's the easiest way. Challenge number two is thinking that you know everything, or at least that you know enough. There is a really steep learning curve as you grow up. And right around the time of, I would say, high school age, you start acquiring a ton of knowledge and a lot of new skills. That learning curve jumps dramatically. You're starting to drive, you're starting to maybe work on your own job, you're starting to gain that independence and freedom, and suddenly you think that you know everything. And again, that's not a terrible thing in the sense of that's what almost all kids go through at some point in time, is the idea of I've arrived. I'm now an independent adult at 15 or 16 or 17 or 18. I've made it. I now can make all my own choices. And the problem is that you will never arrive. And that sounds discouraging at first, but there's never a point in time where being an independent thinker means that you never need help or criticism or advice or guidance from somebody else. Whether you're 15 or whether you're 30 or whether you're 55 or 70, there's always going to be a point in time where you need help from somebody else. Being independent does not mean that you are completely an island to yourself. And especially at this age, it's a really important time to take the guidance. Take those ideas and use them to the best of your ability. Do not believe yourself to be self-sufficient and independent in all areas. A couple of questions that come to mind is, at your age, do you know how the world works? 32, I still have no idea how to do my taxes. As weird as that sounds, I've always had someone else do them for me. I don't know how the world works. Now, at 15, I thought I knew everything. Especially at 17, I had everything down. 15 was, I was getting there. 17, I arrived. And realize now at 32, I know less than I did when I was at 15. The third challenge we often have as younger individuals is the developing brain. And don't get me wrong on this. And we mature completely, as we grow up. And physically, mentally, we mature. And that's a good process. But realizing that you're still in that process is also pretty important. Statistically speaking, most female brains develop fully at the age of 21, and for males is until 25. We take a little extra. Before 25, our biscuit's not quite cooked all the way through. But we don't feel that way at 15 or 18 or 20 or 22 or 23. We don't feel that we are still maturing in our ability to reason, but we still are. Interestingly enough, 21 and 25 respectively are the ages that insurance for vehicles drop dramatically, because suddenly, we're not making as many dumb mistakes on the road because our reasoning ability has jumped dramatically because we have finally developed. My point is that as you begin that process of developing your own thinking process, realize that at the young ages that you're at, that you're still developing that. And lean a little extra hard on individuals who are older and care for you greatly, trying to help guide you in those times. Our fourth challenge I would like to mention is the idea of giving up preconceived notions or preconceived ideas. There are things that you inherit from the people around you as you believe are correct or true or right, that it does take a process for you to be willing to believe that they may be wrong. There are certain things that you will grow up believing that this is exactly as it is. Dodge is the best vehicle until you own a Dodge and it leaves you stranded on the side of the road. Those are our preconceived ideas. And sometimes as we grow up, we are unwilling to ever give them up. And until we realize that, we have a hard time developing our own reasoning. Now, preconceived ideas go this way. A preconceived idea is an idea that's been given to you that is not based on fact, but is based on faith on the individual who's given you that idea. And what we can do is we can take that preconceived idea, challenge it against facts, and then either adopt it as our own, or we can reject it and look for what is based on fact. Those are the four kind of main challenges I see them when it comes to gaining independent thinking. But that's not the only challenge when it comes to gaining our own faith. Move over with me to Hebrews chapter 11, there in verse 3. It says in verse 3, by faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made of things that are visible. Many times in our striving for independence from our parents or from our grandparents or from our family members, we tend to attach ourselves to somebody else or some other idea. We make the choice to reject what our parents believed was true, and we reject their faith, and we don't always immediately begin the process of looking for truth, but we find somebody else who's maybe charismatic, who's eloquent or persuasive. Perhaps it's someone who is kind and empathetic and really understanding of the situation that you're going through, especially when your family isn't kind or empathetic or doesn't seem to be understanding the things you're going through. And instead of building our own faith, sometimes we simply just adopt someone else's faith. This can sometimes be teachers or counselors or even preachers or philosophers or scientists, individuals that we believe are are a lot more intelligent than us, and therefore know a lot more than we do, and actually usually assume that they know more than they actually do know. We become enamored with their ideas and teachings, not because we're enamored with their ideas and teachings, but because really we're enamored with them as an individual. Because they're charismatic, because they're eloquent, because they care for me as an individual. Have you ever wondered why TV evangelists can have huge followings, and it's the fact that they're really energetic and they're really passionate, and people aren't really buying so much into their ideas, but buying into the individual. This happens sometimes with professors as individuals go through either high school or early college. They meet philosophy professors or science teachers who teach them that God is illogical or that God is not proven by science. And they latch on to them as an individual and they abandon their faith not because of the facts that are presented, but because they believe that individual has the answers. Moving our faith to other people is problematic for one main reason. They're people. Hebrews chapter 11 is all about the idea of having faith in God. Not having faith in ourselves or having faith in our family or having faith in other individuals, but having faith in God, because as you go through Hebrews chapter 11, He's unmovable. He is faithful. He is just. He is the Almighty and the Creator. He is the Sustainer. He has all knowledge, and He is the repository of all truth and the revealer of all mysteries. If you put your faith in people, people will always give you opportunity to lose your faith. Whether it's your parents or grandparents, whether it's aunt or uncle, or a preacher or an elder, they will always give you some opportunities to doubt your faith if you put your faith in them. God is faithful, God is true, and He is just. He is the only one that is due honor and glory and praise. And He is the one who is absolutely and unequivocally worthy of your faith. So if you simply move your faith to somebody else, you're not really moving your faith to God. You're making a substitute. In Ephesians chapter 6, I mentioned last week that these are our lessons I really wish that somebody else other than myself were able to present, because these are things that I wish I had more information on. I wish I had a better life experience to draw from. One of the areas that I find time and time again that individuals have struggled with in making faith their own is overcoming their parental shortcomings. Where they have parents or a parent who has either not lived up to expectations, or who has in their mind done them wrong, or who has actually done them wrong and has dissuaded them from believing in God. And here in Ephesians chapter 6, there in verse 4, we have the command to fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but to bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. And as you get over to Titus chapter 2, a couple pages over into Titus chapter 2, there in verse 3 and in verse 4, Paul writes to Titus, and he tells him, to the older women likewise be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the younger women to love their husbands and children. We are to be individuals who, as parents, are the best examples we can be, and doing everything we can to lead someone on the right path. But if you're a parent this morning and you're a perfect parent, go ahead and raise your hand. Oddly enough, I don't see any hands. There is no parent who's perfect. As much as we try, we make mistakes. There is no one who understands everything about parenting and knows how to handle every single child in every single scenario. But parental mistakes and shortcomings can be a huge hindrance to children. It can be discouraging and disheartening, and it can draw people away from God, but it doesn't have to do that. It doesn't have to be that way. To the children, I would like to remind them that parents are usually young and really inexperienced. Everyone is the world's best parent until they have their own child. And I think most parents feel exactly that same way. You can be a great aunt and a great uncle. You can spend a lot of time with the kids at church, but until you have your own kid, everything you know doesn't really amount to a lot. Because once you have your own kid, you go, I have no idea what to do with this. I remember as we were getting ready to leave the hospital, Lydia, we were there a couple of days, and I felt frazzled and at wit's end at the hospital with a whole bunch of doctors and nurses. And they're like, okay, here you go, put it in the car. I'm like, They don't leave me alone with pepper shakers at the restaurants. Those the pepper grind milk. They take those away from me at the restaurant. And now you're giving me a kid to go home with. Parents are usually very young and very inexperienced with kids. I remember, I'm the youngest of 2 children, and I remember my dad's 30th birthday. And it just so happens that Brittany and I got married at almost exactly the same age my parents got married. We had kids almost exactly the same age that my parents had, my sister and I. And when I turned 32 years ago, I remember looking at Liam and go, oh man, I was his age when my dad turned 30. And I feel really young. As a kid, 30 is ancient. 30 is unbelievably old. And now at 30, I'm like, I am still way too young to have kids. People shouldn't trust me with kids. Parents are young, and as children, we should be willing to give our parents a little grace, understanding as they make mistakes. This is not an excuse to dishonor or disobey parents for you to tell them, well, you're young and you're inexperienced. It's actually all the more reason to honor them and to care for them and to obey them. But give your parents understanding. Try to understand that they really do love you, and as they do make mistakes from time to time, they're trying still. But when it comes to areas of faith, some have allowed their parental shortcomings to hinder them and to turn them away from God, and instead of finding their own faith. This should never be the case. As we grow up, we are to find faith in God, and our parents, while they can help guide us in that direction, they really have no part of that equation, as weird as that sounds. If you turn over to Romans chapter 14, we'll look at this passage in 2 different respects. In Romans chapter 14, there in verse 22, Paul writes, the faith that you have, keep that between yourself and God. My faith in God doesn't have a whole lot to do with my parents. I have been hugely blessed in having parents who care for me and love me and have taught me truth. But as much as they care for me and love me and teach me truth, it is still up to me to find my own faith. Whether they did a good job of that or a bad job of that. Individuals who are raised by atheists still have a responsibility to find God and to have their own faith. Individuals who were raised by Christians had the responsibility to find God and have their own faith. My relationship between me and my God is not based and dependent upon my parents. And if I blame my parents for my lack of faith in God, then I really haven't gained my independence as I grew up. It is a struggle for individuals to overcome parental shortcomings, but do not let that hinder your relationship with God. Your parents can guide you and to teach you and to help you along the path, but they cannot have your faith in God. And they can't ruin your faith in God if you allow them. The last thing I would like to talk about when it comes to hindrances to faith is hypocrisy. Keep your finger in there in Romans chapter 14. We'll come back to that in a moment. But turn with me in Matthew chapter 23. Matthew chapter 23. Jesus here in Matthew chapter 23 is pronouncing the woes upon the Pharisees or the scribes and the Pharisees. And there in verse 13, he makes mention of their hypocrisy. He says, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You neither enter in yourselves, nor allow those who would enter in to go in." Hypocrisy is a huge hindrance. It's a terrible and it's frustrating. It is usually noted, but in 2 major ways, though. The first one is when you see a person that, on the appearance, seems to be doing things that are right, but you know that behind the scenes, they're not really living a Christian life. That's hard. Especially whenever you see maybe an individual who is praised for their honesty living a double life, or praised for their integrity only to see them outside of worship service or outside of church doing things that you know that they would never want anyone else to see. And it's gutting to watch someone. And it's discouraging to watch other people praise them or to tell them how great they're doing when you know that they're not doing things the right way. The second way that hypocrisy is often noticed is whenever sins are made public. Either an individual who comes forward, who you thought was a tremendously strong Christian, come and express that they're currently struggling with sins. Or whenever it's made known to the church by other means that here is so-and-so, that we will have to talk to them about the things that they're going through. We'll have to make actions, as we often talk about. And there's two things I would like to say about that. The first one is, hypocrisy is not always as it seems. We are not born into a Christian life being fully mature and being perfect in every way. We struggle with sin from time to time. And it seems, at least in my life, every time I have one that I have choked out and I strangled and I got this one under control, there's another one that comes up. It's the old story of the many-headed serpent. That every time I conquer one, there's another head that rears its head itself. And maybe what you're seeing is not a Christian who is giving in to sin and living a two-faced life, but is a Christian who is currently struggling with sin and is fighting to not let it win. Especially as an individual who comes forward. We are not a collection of perfect people, but we are a collection of people who are imperfect, who are striving to allow God to make them perfect. And sometimes when we see hypocrisy in our own minds as it being hypocrisy, it's really someone who's just struggling with sin like every Christian does. And we can encourage and we can help them. We can try to bear their burdens, but realize that they are still working through the things that they're working through. And secondly, sometimes hypocrisy is exactly what it looks like. Here in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus, knowing their hearts, calls it for what it is, and it is hypocrisy. And there is no excuse for it. It's a disgusting and it's demoralizing to watch people who are claiming to be leaders in the church here, or in the Jewish community, who are living two-faced lives, who will travel halfway around the globe, he describes here, only to make their proselytes twice the child of hell as they are. That's hard. It is really difficult to deal with that. But as we go back to Romans chapter 14, and there in verse 22, the answer is still the same. The faith that you have, keep it between yourself and God. That's your faith. And my favorite passage on this topic is in Joshua chapter 24. It's a passage probably most of us, if not many of us, have hanging up on our home somewhere. This seems to be the pretty typical housewarming gift or a marriage gift, a wedding gift, is this passage here in Joshua chapter 24, there in verse 15. Choose for yourself who you will serve this day. And then, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Just as my parents can guide me and encourage me or discourage me in my faith, it is still my faith. It is still my responsibility. And as much as I can be encouraged or discouraged by other Christians, as much as I can be hurt by their hypocrisy, my faith is still my faith. Joshua stands up in front of the crowd and tells them that you can choose for yourself whom you will serve. Here's a people who claim to be God's people, who are inheriting the land that God has promised them to inherit by obeying the laws that God had told them to obey. And Joshua gives them the opportunity here to choose for themselves who they will serve. And his answer there is not, and I will follow you, and I'll be encouraged or discouraged by the things that you do, but it is, but regardless, I will serve the Lord. Recognize that your faith is your faith. And as much as we can be encouraged or discouraged by others, we still have the responsibility of doing what's right. There are many hindrances and potholes along the way to finding your own faith. There's challenging things that come up. But once you see those potholes, it's easy to kind of drive around them. If you're young, take the time to realize that we don't know everything. Lean on those who love you and care for you and are going to give you good, sound advice. Take the time to gain independent thinking, but do it the smart way. Don't automatically reject all the good things your parents have already given you, but take those good things and test them to see if they're true according to God's Word. Don't let your parental shortcomings hinder you from the things you need to do. And don't let other people's shortcomings hinder you from doing the things that you need to do. Your faith is important. So the challenge for this week is to let nothing stand in your way from building your faith. Figure out what's in your life that is currently discouraging you from having better faith. And recognize that your faith is between you and God. And that those things shouldn't be a part of the equation. That God has given you enough in order for you to have faith in him, regardless of other things going on in your life. The Song of Invitation that John has picked out is number 813. If you have been discouraged and if you haven't been living the life that you need to live, if you haven't been as strong as you need to be, and you would like the prayers and help and encouragement of the congregation, please let us know as we stand and sing number 813.